Another day and another refereeing controversy here in the Sixers vs. Knicks series. After that impressive and heroic performance from Tyrese Maxey in Game 5 to pull the Sixers team from inches from elimination into a exciting Game 6 matchup here, we got some bad news the following day from the League 2-Minute Report. Fred Katz of The Athletic tweets, more referee drama. The last 2 minutes report from Game 5 says that Tyrese Maxey traveled before his 4-point play with 25 seconds left. Should have been a turnover and Knicks ball with the Knicks up 7. And for reference here, I do believe he's incorrect that it was Knicks up 6 at that point because Maxey hit the 3-pointer in the and one, which then cut the game to 2. But regardless, the point being that if that play was quote-unquote called correctly, we would have a much different game. Now, I do want to speak on, for starters, Knicks fans, you have absolutely zero room to complain about this, that we just saw these Sixers quite literally get a game dragged into a defeat, which should have been a victory because of missed calls. And if you want to break down the last 2-minute report, the Knicks are still leading 7-4 in the series, so I don't want to hear any victory laps run here. But the bottom line is there is a larger point I want to get to, and regardless of sides here, the Knicks have been screwed by it. The Sixers have been screwed by it. There's just been some straight-up horrible refereeing in this series. And that brings me to my point for Game 6 here, that I just want this game to be fully decided by the players. That if we have to sit up here and discuss some referee calls down the stretch in tomorrow morning, I will be so infuriated by that. And I do think that there is a larger conversation here, that I don't think this is unique just to the Knicks and Sixers series. I think this is a league-wide issue from the NBA, and there's a lot of factors that play into it. The way the guys foul bait, headlined by the Joel Embiid and Jalen Brunsons of the world, guys like Trae Young, there's constantly rule changes. But this pick-and-choose mentality from referees for what is a foul, what isn't, when a foul is called, and kind of the lack of situational awareness in some circumstances is incredibly frustrating to me. That I do hate that, and as a just fan of the sport of basketball, I do think it waters down the product to a massive extent, and I do think that should be at the top of the list for these Sixers for making sure, or for the NBA as a whole, for making sure they're getting back on the same page moving forward. Now, when I speak about that as the basketball conversation, it does appear like the NBA has brought in the big guns for this matchup. When looking at the referee assignment ahead of Game 6, that Scott Foster is set to be the crew chief, Bill Kennedy as the referee, Mark Lindsay as the umpire, and J.B. DeRosa as the alternate. Now, I know that most of us aren't super into referees, but if you know anything about them, Scott Foster and Bill Kennedy, two of the more electric and recognizable figures across the sport. That Scott Foster specifically, known as the extender. And the reason for that, home teams have won a 66.1% of games officiated by Scott Foster in 23-24, that being this season. Foster will be an official in the Sixers vs. Knicks game tonight in Philadelphia. Home teams also are outscoring road teams by an average of 7 points per game in Foster's games. The Sixers are -3 favorites. Now, I don't think this is something to read too heavily into. There have been situations, and what bothers me specifically about Scott Foster is he does let some past situations with players impact his current view of the game. I know Chris Paul is one of the players where he has a ridiculous record against, where I forget what it is offhand, but he's like 1-80 against Scott Foster, or somewhere, that was a little extreme, but somewhere along those lines there. I don't think there's any players that directly impacts in this game, at least that I've seen, no trends in that direction, but it does frustrate me. And what I consider the Scott Foster special is when he will get a call wrong, the player will argue, and then he immediately hits him with a technical. And it's just such a big momentum swing through the game. That's what we cannot have on full display. And the other referee to mention there, Bill Kennedy, just absolutely electric on the mic. So I do hope that he's the guy handling the reviews. I don't expect that to be the case because I believe that's a crew chief job. But regardless, shout out to Bill Kennedy. I do like his style of refereeing. Now, as the game as a whole, when looking at what this game can play out, I do have a factor that I want to bring up and something that I wanted to pitch for why I think this will be differently. What I think should change tonight and what I think could totally decide the game is which coach is willing to dig deeper into their bench. That both Nick Nurse and Tom Thibodeau are some of the more old school styles of coaching. That one of the concepts of playoffs, one of the mindsets or advantages that coaches tend to bring is you simply play your best players longer. But there is a lot of miles logged on each of these guys. And to get into it specifically, look at these Sixers minutes of played this playoffs. Tyrese Maxey, 45 minutes per game. Joel Embiid, 41.6 minutes per game. That is a ton for Joel Embiid. Tobias Harris, 37.8. Kelly Oubre, 36.4. Kyle Lowry, 32.6. Nico Batum, 28.4. And then look at the drop-off with Cam Payne being the next highest played player at 11.5 minutes per game. Now, essentially, the Sixers are running a six-man rotation. And yes, I know they dig deep into the 7 or 8, but there's clearly not much trust beyond that top 6 right there. While I agree with that and understand playing your best players, I do think a splash of energy could be enough to sway the game. And this is why I once again pound the table and have two bold predictions for who those players could be. Number one, Ricky Council IV. That the Sixers upgraded his contract to a standard NBA deal for a reason, because he might be needed in the playoffs, and straight up, I think he will be. That I think he has the ability to change the flow of momentum of game with the effort level he plays at. That the already athleticism, the already pop that he plays with is going to absolutely shine compared to all these guys whose legs look so dead. And the other prediction, we get a Buddy Hield redemption arc today. Buddy Hield, it's been a tough stretch for him. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But I do think that his skill set is so necessary on the Sixers team that it might be worth it to roll the dice and give him one more opportunity. We have not seen Buddy Hield play in 2 games now. Obviously, he missed a couple of shots, and that's really the only reason that he is on the floor. But I do think that if you can get him going, knock down a 3 early on, that changes the scale of this game and the outlook from both teams' perspective. So I would not mind if Nick Nurse rolls the dice and gives that an opportunity tonight. And I also wanted to note that this is not just a Sixers-specific issue. The New York Knicks lean in on the exact same way. And to look at their minutes per game here, Josh Hart, 46.4 minutes per game. Jalen Brunson, 43.8 minutes per game. OG Anunoby, 40.8. DiVincenzo, 28.8. Miles McBride, 26.2. And Isaiah Hartenstein, 25.8. And then a very similar situation where Mitchell Robinson's still logging 21.3. They have a little bit less of a significant drop-off. I will say the Knicks kind of have situationally gone about it in a way where I think the Sixers have not, and some of that being due to the injury of Mitchell Robinson and other factors there. But the bottom line is both these teams are leaning on their main horses a ton to get the job done, and while I totally get that, there comes a point where you got to think differently. So we will see how it ultimately shakes up with that, but I am in favor of Nick Nurse digging deep in that bench for a look for a spark and seeing what happens. And again, to speak on the series as a whole, I know I complained about referees. I know it's been a frustrating series. There's been plenty of beef between the Sixers and Knicks community, which I do love. That's a part of the playoffs as a whole. But I just want to note how great this series has been, and I do truly hope that it does not end tonight, that this does feel like a matchup that should be destined for a Game 7 in Madison Square Garden. I once again think it's a bummer that these two teams are facing off in the first round, that I do think that these are the second and third best teams in the Eastern Conference, and if the bracket had aligned differently, this very well could have been a conference semifinal, maybe even conference final if one of these teams would have been capable of knocking off Boston, because I do think these are the two teams with the best chance across the entire conference. And to kind of put evidence on that, just look at how close this series has been. That when we look at the total points scored, the Sixers, 534, and the Knicks, 532. It just doesn't get much closer than that, and it is cool to see this level of basketball being played out on the biggest stage. So I do hope this series continues. I do hope that it is a Game 7 matchup that we will be back breaking down and preparing for tomorrow, but ultimately, we will see what happens. That this is likely the biggest game of these, obviously the biggest game of the Sixers season. I think you could argue in the Daryl Morey era, this is the biggest game of the Sixers, because it would not be a great look for this team to get sent home in the first round after Morey did sit on his hands a little more than people like to be the case during the deadline. Buddy Hield really the only prize, and we just had that conversation about how underwhelming he has been. So I think it would mean a lot to go push this series to a Game 7 after going down 3-1. It will take the effort level from everybody, take a better Joel Embiid game, take Tyrese Maxey continuing to play like the superstar he is, and maybe we'll just take a little bit of extra run on the bench. So we will see what happens. I do want to hear from you guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Give me a score prediction for Sixers versus Knicks Game 6. Appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in. Make sure you're hitting that like button, smashing that subscribe to keep the Sixers Digest family growing, and I'll be back breaking down whatever happens one way or another. Peace.